Hi everyone and welcome to the internet. What we're going to be doing in today's lesson is having a look at the heart and the blood and how it actually circulates through our body. So hopefully by the end of this lesson you'll be able to describe how blood flows through the body and explain those different steps that are needed. Now to start us off, what we've got are 3 questions based around our previous lesson. So have a go answering these 3 questions in your books. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do this. Okay, let's check those answers then. So for our first question, the 3 types of blood vessel that we've got: artery, vein and capillary. Give yourself a mark for each of those that you got correct. The second one, describing the 2 differences between our arteries and our veins. Now you've got to go careful here because some of you may have written things that aren't going to be worth the mark. You'll notice in the first 2 marking points, then I've underlined and put in bold the ER there. Now we've got to have a comparative statement here. So you can't just write arteries have a thick elastic and muscle wall. If you don't have something about the veins or something comparing the 2, you won't get the marks on this. So maximum of any 2 from. Arteries have a thicker elastic and muscle wall than veins, or arteries have a thick elastic and muscle wall and veins have a thin one. That works. Arteries have a smaller lumen than veins, or arteries have a small lumen and veins have a large lumen. Or finally, you could have said that veins have valves, but arteries do not. You've got to have both comments about the artery and the vein to get any of those marks. Then the last one, why is the human circulatory system described as a closed double circulatory system? The reason it's closed is because the blood remains in the heart and vessels at all times. Mark for that bit. and it's double because the blood will flow through the heart twice on one circuit around the body. A mark for that one. So add up your marks. There's a total of 3, 4, 5, 7 today. So give yourself a score out of 7. So in the first part of today's lesson, we're going to look at the heart in more detail. So what I've got for you here are 3 sentences with some odd words missing. Now, the ones that are actual words, I've obviously given to you in the box at the bottom. The one for the heartbeat, which would be a number, I didn't give to you because it'd be a little bit obvious. So that one, you just need to think of the number yourself and hopefully get the right one. Now, when we're actually filling out these 3 sentences, this is just about our heart. And one word that you should really be aware of is the word cardiac. So you can see it's one of the words in our word box there. Wherever we see the word cardiac, that's just relating to the heart. So anything that's cardiac something is something to do with the heart. So have a go at writing those 3 sentences, filling in the blanks in your book. I'll give you about another 2 minutes to do that. Right, let's double check to make sure we got the right words in the right places then. So the heart is made of cardiac muscle, and these cells contract without receiving a nerve impulse from the brain. A typical heartbeat is 70 beats per minute. So obviously give yourself a tick for each one of those you got right. If you got any of them wrong, make sure you've written the correct word in their place. Now, when we're thinking about cardiac muscle, this is actually one of those special types of muscle we've got in our body. And as it tells us here, it doesn't need us to tell it to contract. So we don't need that nerve impulse going from our brain to the heart to get it to contract. Therefore, you can pump blood without thinking about it. And that's pretty important because if you actually had just your skeletal muscle like you've got in your arms and your legs, then we actually consciously think to contract that. So when we want to raise our arm, we think, oh, actually, I'm going to raise my arm. And then we send an impulse to the skeletal muscle in our arm and it contracts, allowing us to move. If we had that same need to send that nerve impulse to our heart to make it contract, then you'd obviously have to think about that approximately 70 times a minute just to make your heart contract. Now, I don't really think if we're having to send a message to our heart making it contract 70 times a minute, we're going to be overly productive, first of all. And secondly, the moment we fall asleep, then it's going to be sad news and we're going to be dead. Because the moment we're asleep, we're not sending that message for the heart to contract, no blood is being pumped, no oxygen's getting around, and it's game over. So cardiac muscle, really important because it contracts without the nerve impulse. So what I've got for you here then is a typical diagram of the heart that you are going to see in pretty much any textbook. Now, what we've got in the red box are all the different parts of the heart that you could be asked to label. I haven't put the valves on there at this point. Now, if you know the names of the valves, by all means add those in, but see if you can label the main parts of the heart. These are the ones that I'm hoping you at least know some of. Now, you can print out this diagram. I've put a copy of it up on my website in the Internet School Resources section. But if you don't have it, you can do a quick sketch. It doesn't have to be perfect, just to give you an idea of where bits are. Obviously, if you are one of those students who loves a perfect diagram, just hit pause on the video, take your time doing your drawing, label up those bits, and then play again once you're ready. So I'm going to give you about 2 more minutes to have a go at labeling those parts on the diagram. Let's make sure we've got all of these parts in the right places then. So what we can see on the screen then are all of the correct labels. Now I'm not going to read out all of them because obviously I'm not pointing at them, which means it's a little bit tricky to go through. But have a little look, mark any you got right as correct, and if you got any wrong, then obviously make sure you have a correct version of this diagram. And again, I'll make sure that you've got a copy of this on the website so that you can then get a full copy should you want to. You'll also see on the right there, I've given you a little bit of a tip for how you can actually learn this, because you could be asked about labelling part of this heart. So the best way to do it is either draw out or print out a copy of this diagram, cover over the key words, and then test yourself on it. And once you've got that in your head, then get a blank version of the heart and then just try and label it. And the more you do that, the more parts are going to stick in your long-term memory. So key things that I think you need to remember from this diagram. Well, all of it really. There's no short way to do this. It's a lot of learning. But bits I'm going to draw your attention to. We have 4 chambers that make up the heart. So the heart's divided up into 4 separate chambers. We've got 2 atria, which are at the top of the heart, and 2 ventricles, which are at the bottom of the heart. Now, this is something people mix up quite a lot, and you've got a couple of ways you can actually remember it. So the first one is thinking about the alphabet. A comes before V, and the top comes before the bottom in the heart. So atria at the top, ventricles at the bottom. The other way you could helpfully remember it is if you look at the bottom of the heart, the shape of those 2 chambers is a V shape, and they're the ventricles. So if you know they're the ventricles, the ones above them will be the atria. Now the heart is divided up into two sides, so you can see there's that dividing line called the septum that runs down the middle there. Now that splits it into the left and the right hand side. And you might be looking at this diagram and thinking, well, I've got it wrong. The left is on the right and the right is on the left. That's not wrong. This is what we've got to be careful of when we're looking in our exams at the heart diagram. You've got to imagine like you're lying on the actual exam desk waving up at yourself, and your right hand then that's waving at you is on the right hand side. Okay, so that's the right side of the heart. But when you're looking at the paper, it's on the left hand side of the piece of paper on the desk. So you've got to remember to reverse it. Now, we've also got three names of valves to remember: tricuspid, bicuspid, and semilunar. The semilunar occurs twice. So wherever blood is leaving the heart, it's a semilunar valve. So we find that at the junction of our pulmonary artery and our aorta. The other ones, the bicuspid and the tricuspid, they're between the atria and the ventricles. Now the easiest way to remember which goes on which side is tricuspid has an RI in the middle, just like the word right, and it's found on the right side. So tricuspid, RI on the right between the atrium and the ventricles, and then the bicuspid is the one between your left atrium and left ventricle. So obviously make sure you've got a copy of that diagram either printed or drawn out, correctly labelled in your books. Okay, let's put this knowledge into a bit of practice then. What I'd like you to do is start off by creating a flowchart to show the order of the parts of the heart that blood passes through, starting with the vena cava. And if you've got your diagram, that can help you out, so just follow it through. And then if you finish that, see if you can have a go at explaining how muscle cells receive oxygen, and include as much detail as you can, so parts of the heart, what they do, etc. I'm going to give you about 2.5 minutes to do this. Let's start with the flowchart then. So we start with the vena cava on the top left there. So from there it goes into the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, then through the semilunar valve into the pulmonary artery, because arteries always go away from the heart. Then it travels to the lungs where it's going to pick up oxygen. Then it returns to the heart through the pulmonary vein, into the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle, through the semilunar valve, into the aorta, and then around the body. And then it will return through the vena cava to the right atrium, and round we go again. So this is a really good way to learn the different parts of the heart in the correct sequence, because you could be asked to describe the passage of blood through the heart. So this is a good way to do it. So if you need a copy of that, I'll leave it up for about another minute to give you a chance to get it in your books. If you think you're going to need longer, then just hit pause and take as long as you need. So the second part of that question I asked you to do was to explain how blood is going to actually circulate the oxygen to our respiring cells. And this is the explanation in full. So this is obviously every part of the heart listed and what's happening. So the blood enters the heart in the right atrium. It flows through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle and is pumped out through the semilunar valve into the pulmonary artery. The blood travels to the lungs where it binds to oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. The blood flows back to the heart through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. It goes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle where it's pumped through the semilunar valve into the aorta. The blood moves through other arteries until it reaches the muscles where oxygen diffuses across the capillary walls into the cells. So that is pretty much every bit of detail I could think of to add. If you really wanted to talk about the fact that the arteries branch into smaller arteries until they eventually become the capillaries, obviously you could have added that detail. You could have talked about the specialization of the capillary walls if you want to, being only 1 cell thick, but that gives you the full overview of what happens to get the oxygen to our respiring cells. Next thing we're going to do then is look at the blood in more detail. So first thing I'd like to do is write down a bullet point list of the parts of the blood. I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds. So hopefully what we've got in our books are there 4 parts of the blood: the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets and the plasma. Now what we're going to do is work through those one at a time and look at them in more detail. So we're going to start off with the red blood cells. What I'd like you to do then is finish off the sentence there: the job of the red blood cells is to, and then list how red blood cells are adapted to carry out this job. So think about how they're specialised to carry out the job that they're designed to do. So I'm going to give you about a minute and a half to get that done. So the job of the red blood cells is to transport oxygen. Now what we've got here are 4 key specializations that they've got in order to make them good at transporting oxygen. So the first one is about their size. So they're small, which allows them to fit through the capillaries, and they've got a large surface area to volume ratio. And the whole need for that large surface area to volume ratio is for rapid diffusion of oxygen across the membrane there. Inside the red blood cell, they've got a special protein called a carrier protein, and the name of that carrier protein is hemoglobin, and that's what's going to actually bind the oxygen. They don't have a nucleus, so they're the only cells in your body that do not have a nucleus, and that's in order to leave as much room as possible for the hemoglobin. And finally, they've got a special shape, which you need to know the name of, which is called a biconcave disc. Now, bi means 2, concave dips in. So basically, if you think about it, it's like having a little ball of blue tack and then just squishing it between your finger and your thumb. You end up with a dip on either side. Same thing here, biconcave disc. And the whole idea behind that shape is to increase that surface area to volume ratio, which then means they've got rapid diffusion of the oxygen across the membrane. So make sure you've got those 4 different specializations written in your books, and make sure you did get their job correct to transport oxygen. I'll leave this up for about another minute and a half to give you a chance to get those points written down. What we've got here then are 2 sentences for you to have a go at finishing using the words in our word bank there in the red box, and then see if you can write me down the balanced symbol equation for aerobic respiration. A bit of a flashback to when we did our work in B1 there. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to have a go at those points. Let's double check we've got the right words in the right places then. So in the lungs, oxygen reacts with hemoglobin to make oxyhemoglobin. You could have had the oxygen and the hemoglobin either way around. And then at respiring tissues, the oxyhemoglobin breaks down and oxygen is delivered to the respiring cells. Then let's double check our balanced symbol equation. Now this is one that it's vital you learn because this is pretty highly likely to come up on your exam. I can't guarantee it anymore. Used to be a guarantee. Now I'd just say it's highly likely to come up on your exam papers. But C6H12O6, that's glucose, plus 6O2, so 6 oxygen molecules, makes 6 CO2, 6 carbon dioxide molecules, and 6 H2O, 6 water molecules. So tick any you got right, correct any you got wrong. The second component of our blood then are the white blood cells. So see if you can write down in your books what the white blood cells do. Hopefully what we remember is that the white blood cells are the ones that help your body to fight off infection. And there's two ways that they can do this. The first is they make a substance called an antibody, and the second is they engulf and digest microorganisms. And we're going to look at how they do this in a lot more detail when we come on to B6, when we look at disease and how we prevent it in the body. So that's just a little bit of an insight into what's coming in B6. Now, the other part that we should know is how to identify them in either a microscope slide or a diagram. Now, I've given you a picture from a microscope slide at the bottom in the middle there, and what we've got are 2 white blood cells in there. The rest are red blood cells. And the way we can tell the difference between them is that the white blood cells contain this really large lobed nucleus. So you can see in those 2 larger cells there, there's that purple splodge. So that is the large nucleus in our white blood cells. The ones that just look like pink circles, those are the red blood cells. So make sure you've got those points written down, and if you got it right, obviously give yourself a tick. Our third component of the blood are the platelets. So see if you can finish off the sentence just highlighting what the platelets are used to do. So the platelets' role is to help clot our blood when we cut ourselves. So really important to avoid you bleeding to death from a paper cut. And again, when we get onto B6, we're going to look at this in a lot more detail on how it actually happens. But for the sake of B2, you just need to know platelets help to clot the blood. Our fourth and final component then is the plasma. Now plasma itself is a straw coloured liquid, so kind of a yellowy coloured liquid there, that all of those blood cells float in. But it also acts as a transport medium for carrying certain other things around the body. So see if you can write down that first sentence and then fill out those bullet points as to what the plasma is also carrying. When we're thinking about what the plasma carries then, it carries all of those digested food products, so amino acids, glucose, all of those bits. It carries waste products like carbon dioxide. It will carry all the hormones around our body. It carries those antibodies that are made by our white blood cells. And it carries excess water. So if you didn't get those, add them in to your answer now. Last thing for today then is the plenary. So those of you with target grades up to a grade 5, it's the 2 columns on the left. Those of you with the target grades over a grade 5, it's the 2 columns on the right. So I'm going to leave this up for about 2 minutes today, but obviously if you think you're going to need longer, just hit pause on the video and take as long as you need to answer those questions. As always, you can find the answers to the plenary over on my website, sciencewright.weebly.com. You'll also be able to find that under the Internet tab. Just select the week that we're in, and then you'll be able to find things like the lesson PowerPoints, the answers to the plenary, any additional work, and if there's any little experiments I thought you could do at home, then they're there too. So have a look and get using that.